Today's video is on the war with Amalek, and it's the very last verse I want to focus on in Exodus chapter 17. Pick it up from verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, "The Lord is my banner," saying, "A hand upon the throne of the Lord." And it's this last phrase we'll pick up in verse 16. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Of course, this, if we go back to the start of this verse 8, we see that Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. This was the first conflict that the Israelites had, that they actually had to fight. You remember the Passover, they had to offer the lamb. The Red Sea, it was God's power that delivered them from the Egyptians. I remember they saw the Egyptians were dead on the seashore, but here is an actual physical battle. And now the warfare starts. And whenever we think of this, we think of the Christian life and how that the Christian life, whenever we become a Christian, we still have our old sinful nature. And there is that warfare that we have as believers. But then this last expression in verse 16, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation, led me to develop and look at other scriptures which mention this particular group of people. The Amalek, they came, of course, they were the Amalek originally. The name was a grandson of Esau, goes back to the conflict between Jacob and Esau. Then if we go over, so we're going over now to Deuteronomy chapter 25. Deuteronomy chapter 25, pick it up at verse 17. "Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary, and cut off your tail those who were lagging behind you, and he did not fear God." Notice it was Amalek again that took the initiative in the battle. And they attacked on the way when you were faint and weary. And that's often when the old sinful nature attacks us as Christians. It's when we're tired and vulnerable and weak. Let's remember that 1 Samuel 15, you remember the incident with Samuel and Saul. You remember that was what marked the end of Saul's reign. 1 Samuel 15, verse 3, "Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." Most of us familiar with the story. Verse 7, Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt, and he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and devoted to destruction all the people with the heirs of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, of the oxen, of the fattened calves, and the lambs, all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. And then, of course, Samuel then confronts him for his lack of obedience. And remember, verse 20, Saul said to Samuel, "I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me. I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have devoted the Amalek's destruction." And then, of course, he blames the people. And then Samuel replies, "The Lord has great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord." And then, if we go down to the end of the chapter, we see Samuel calls for Agag, king of the Amalekites. Agag came to him cheerfully. Agag said, "Surely the bitterness of death is past." Samuel said, "As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women." And Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. But all this is to show the conflict that existed between the Amalekites and the children of Israel. And that is a great picture, and we come into the New Testament of the conflict that we have as Christians. Galatians chapter 5, verse 16 reminds us of the conflict that there is. Galatians 5, verse 16, but I say to you, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Verse 17, for the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh, and these are opposed to one another to keep you doing from the things you want to do. This is what the Amalekites represent in our lives. Whilst the earlier part of Exodus 17 represents the desires of our heart in the wilderness, and when we're tested in our need to trust God, the Amalekites, the incident with the Amalekites and Moses and Aaron and Hur and Joshua, reminds us of our old sinful nature. These are opposed to one another. But then our last verse is in Romans chapter 6, because it reminds us of the victory that we have in Christ. Verse 20, for when you were slaves of sin, you were free in regard to righteousness. But what fruit were you getting at that time from the things of which you are now ashamed? And then earlier on, in verse 12, let not sin therefore reign your mortal body to obey its passions. Do not present your members to sin as instruments of righteousness or for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. And earlier on in the chapter, in chapter 6, he speaks about the fact that verse 6, we know that our old self was crucified with him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing, so we no longer be enslaved to sin. And this is the point in verse 11. So you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. And that's what is symbolized in the Amalekites. Not just the fact that we have an old sinful nature, but that in Christ, we not only did Christ die for us, but we died with Christ. And through recognizing that, considering ourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus, we can present our members of righteousness, present ourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments of righteousness. And so what is an Old Testament story with many lessons in itself, of course, we can apply to our sanctification in Christ. Thank you for listening.